all
What's
those
the
things,
problem?
those things aren't there because they're good. They're there because there's dysfunction, there are disorders. A book of disorders. What's wrong with you? How do you have this disorder? We don't want to start there, but we get trained, and hopefully you'll keep this freshness going into the field. We want to always ask, what happened? Because there's a reason, and our evidence. I watched a TED Talk, and there's a Danish study out there, a twin study, that they always have the nature-nurture question. Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? What is it? So there's two takes off of the Danish twin study. One take says it's 10% genetics and 90% where we're born. The other one says 20% genetics and 80%. And I'm there. From what I've seen, I'm there. So what happened? So the study that we're going to look at asks this question. It asks, was a person born? What circumstances? What happened in their childhood? What happened in their adolescence? And what happened in adulthood? Now, if a child or an adolescent went through some bad times, we would want to be able to, through counseling, through our resources, through the things that we want to do in our society, to help that person achieve adulthood. Get him a job, I'll say. That'll help him. Well, yeah, we want that, but let's see if a person can get there. So, just skip over that slide. As we go through adolescence, we work through identity, independence, and intimacy. Birth, we're asking these questions. And I did this with foster parents. I wanted them to ask these questions of the kids that were in their care. And I specifically went to children that are in foster care because this study that I was talking about has had a holistic change in how people are approaching working with kids in the foster care system, working with kids in DHS custody. It's caused a holistic reconsideration of how things are doing. So what I asked the foster parents was, what happened that children are in DHS custody? And you'll see how this relates to substance use very soon. And so this is where the study comes in. So they had these 18,000 participants, and they're doing great. Some of them are losing a lot of weight. Some of them lost 50, 60 pounds in this weight loss program, and the researchers are excited. They're like, yeah, they're doing great. And all of a sudden, people started dropping out. They quit. They stopped practicing the weight loss program. They're like, what is going on? Why are these people, they're doing so well. They lost 60 pounds. How did they not keep on going? And anybody knows that folks that try to lose weight typically go through something kind of like that. But they're trying to understand, why are these people not succeeding? So the folks that they worked with, their average age was 57. This was done late 80s, early 90s in San Diego. The Kaiser Permanente Foundation started this study. So Dr. Felitti and Dr. Anda started analyzing their data. They sifted through what can we find to help these people. And peculiarly, after many, many months of looking, they came up with some of the demographics that they obtained. And they had asked these 10 questions of these folks. And what they termed these things were ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And so these were the questions they asked. Could I have someone read number 1, please?
Did a parent or other adult in the household often, or very often, swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt?
What does that refer to?
Which one?
Emotional abuse.
Emotional abuse, absolutely. That's emotional abuse. Number 2, Sonia, can you read number 2?
Sure. Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured.
Right, so what's that?
Physical abuse.
Absolutely, that's physical abuse. And then number 3, talking about, did someone ever have sex with you, follow you, in a, 5 years or older than you while you're a child growing up? That's sexual abuse, obviously. Number 4, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you, thought you were important or special? Your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, support each other? What is that? What's that, Knight?
Neglect.
Yes, absolutely, emotional neglect. Then we go straight into not having enough to eat, wearing dirty clothes, no one to protect you. Parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor. What's that? Another form of neglect. It's physical neglect. These are the things that get kids taken out of their homes. All of those things right there, those first 5 things, are what put people into custody, into protective custody when they're children. So if you're working with a kid that's been in custody, automatically think trauma. They've been through trauma just by virtue of being in custody. They've been through some really bad things. Number 6, were your parents ever separated or divorced? A lot of folks, over 50% of people in Oklahoma go through that. Children that are growing up. It's not necessarily, you didn't think, well, is that really a trauma? Yeah, you're separated from a parent. That relationship significantly changed. Don't care about the best custody split situation. There's still a big change in that dynamic. Was your mother or stepmother, I'm not saying people should stay together. Don't take that the wrong way. Was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, had something thrown at her, often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever hit repeatedly a few minutes, or threatened with a gun or knife? What's that? Domestic abuse. Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker, alcoholic, or who used street drugs? Alcoholic. Was a household member depressed, mentally ill, or did a household member ever attempt suicide? Well, what would be the problem with that for a child growing up with that? If somebody's got so many problems themselves, they're not able to be there for the child. I'm sorry. They're not able to attend to that child. The child's going to have to somehow manage on their own. That's an adverse childhood experience for sure. Was a household member, well, we went through that. Did a household member ever go to prison? I said this before, Oklahoma is the #1 incarcerator of women in the world, not just the United States. We're #1 in the United States. The United States is #1 in the world. We're #1 in the United States. You're doing fine, Oklahoma. So who takes care of the children? It's over twice. We really lock women up. It's over twice the national average. It's a high rate. One lawmaker said, well, we just got meaner women in Oklahoma. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm sure he's still there. And notice I said he. Okay. So, now, what they did is they added up those scores, those categories. So, for every one of those categories, someone experienced, that's a 1. And then you add them up, and that's your adverse childhood experiences score. I can add those up and find at least 2. And I'm not going to ask everybody, but what does this mean? So why is this important to us? Well, I'm going to ask a question. What did all of those events that we just went through have in common? Neglect, abuse, separated from a parent.
They're all traumatic experiences.
They're all traumatic experiences that explicitly and specifically deal with a primary relationship, a relationship in which the child was dependent upon a person to be there or be functional, and that didn't work. So in each one of those events, a primary relationship is broken. So think about that. There's many levels that you can take this, but and it goes to many levels. Believe me. And we're gonna look at some of these statistics in just a minute. How would you postulate this to affect future relationships?
I think probably they're gonna be prone to having those kind of broken relationship event in the future because they are not really familiar with any kind of relationship that can, let's say, hold, because they've never been able to establish that primary relationship. It's gonna be hard for them to establish any secondary relationship without any foundation, if I have to put it that way.
Oh, that's such a good word.
Because the foundation has already been broken.
When our brain, when we're developing from birth to 18 and 25, we're laying the foundation for the rest of our relationships, for the rest of our experiences. I love that word. Hang on to that one. Foundation. Yes, it's this fundamental, most important relationship in your life having dysfunction. That doesn't bode well, and we'll see that because we just talked about the 80-20 split with the Danish twin studies. So remember our curve. Does our curve curve up or does it curve down? Here is the ACE study. It's impacted the restructuring of Oklahoma Department of Health and Child Welfare, Child Protective Services was restructured because of a lawsuit in which 8 children died while in custody. That is unacceptable. If the state takes custody of a child shouldn't die. And it was due to neglect of the state. Now, rather than sue them for $100 million, they wanted them to make some changes. It's a class action suit. Massachusetts went through a similar thing a few years ago, where there was a class action lawsuit against their state. And so this is where this Pinnacle plan was enacted. They've got a shelter in Oklahoma City and has 48 beds, and they typically had about 64 kids staying there. There were a couple kids that died in that shelter, sleeping in the hallways, sleeping on cots, I mean, it's just bad. It's a bad thing. We have a shelter at Youth and Family. It's a private facility. We've never had more kids than beds because we wouldn't allow it to happen. We're not going to put more kids than we have beds, and we have people to watch them. So that's when they say that kids got hurt in shelters, they weren't private shelters, at least not with Youth and Family. Back to the ACE study, which impacted this. Studied 18,000 adults. Average age was 57 in this weight loss study. And what they found was the more traumas that people had, the more their BMI was. So they decided, we're going to look at some other things here. Because the more ACEs, the higher that ACE score, that whether it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever their number was, the more it went up, the more their body mass index went up. ACE reduction reliably predicts simultaneous decrease in all of these conditions. HIV risk, alcohol, heavy drinking, cardiovascular disease, cancer, separation or divorce, life dissatisfaction, mental health conditions, hopelessness, mental health, medical health, or treatment, and pharmacotherapy. Adverse childhood experiences affect, and we'll see what kind of effect they have. That's putting effect sizes. So here's our numbers. We're getting into the heart of the matter. somebody with 0 adverse childhood experiences over here versus someone that's had 1, 2, which I put myself in that category, 3, or 4 or more. So you look at somebody that's a smoker, that goes up a little bit. You know, you have an over 200% greater likelihood of being a smoker if you've had 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. Let's look at alcoholism. Okay, here we're talking about substance use in this class, addictions. And some of these other addictions, you know, if we're talking about body mass index, if somebody's got a food addiction, alcoholism, 0 is pretty down here. 4 or more, almost 600% greater likelihood of being an alcoholic. With IV drug use, you have an almost, well, it's an 1100% greater likelihood of being an IV drug user with 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. So what would you expect with those numbers if you had an IV drug user sitting in front of you in your office that they've had a lot of trauma? That's what Lauren just said. They've had a lot of trauma in their life, and if you're going to make any difference in that substance use, you're going to have to get somewhere with that trauma. This is what this is saying right here. Look at the relation. I mean, you can't infer causation or causality, but there's definitely a link. They said the same thing about smoking. Remember, they said, well, your cancer rates, you know, if you smoke 4 packs a day, your cancer rates are up here. But you can't prove that cigarettes are causing, you know, the tobacco companies use that argument for a long time. But you can't, it's just correlation. You can't say it actually caused it. There's too much correlation. Depression? So let's talk about somebody in your family. If you're doing family counseling with someone that's depressed, ACE score of 0, there's your male is the darker purple, the female is the lighter purple. If you get up to 4 and you're female, you have almost 600% greater chance of being depressed. You have a 350% greater chance of being depressed as a male. Why the discrepancy? Do you remember, I'll jump in. Do you remember the video we just watched with the horse and then the jockey over there? What's different about a male versus a female in that type of a situation?
Aggression?
Males are more aggressive. Males show their feelings through aggression. It's a cultural thing, definitely here. I mean, so if showing depression is unacceptable, it's a sign of weakness as a male. Well, I'm not going to be depressed. I'm going to be. What would you look for in this other big percentage of males that aren't showing up here with females? You'd look for aggression. You'd look for assault and battery charges, domestic violence. You'd look for things of that nature to fill that gap. Because that energy, that bad energy's got to go somewhere. Suicide attempts. 4 or more, 1,300% greater chance of having of multiple suicide attempts there. The rates of suicide attempts go up. Okay, this is we talked about relationships, how they affect relationships. The red line is domestic violence. With 5 or more, you are 500% more likely to be in a relationship with intimate partner violence. To be promiscuous, have 50 or more sexual partners, that chance goes up about 600%. So the number of sexual partners increases with each ACE. 3 or more marriages, failed relationships. With each one of these traumatic events goes up, that makes it almost an increase of 400%. That's That's pretty significant. I don't know of any other study that's out there that does more holistically looking across dysfunction than this. Incidence of rape goes up almost 900% with 5 or more. So, questions or thoughts before I move on to a little different subject?
This just shows how much of a greater work counselors do, especially when they are successful in helping one client who comes presenting with all these kind of issues. And also it shows how knowledgeable counselors need to be in order to be effective in providing the help that will help their clients to really be at a level where they can be able to function, because this is a lot of trauma, and without this kind of understanding, it is easy to do more harm than to help the client, especially when you don't have this kind of knowledge.
One of the good things nice about the study, and we'll get to it, because there surely aren't a lot of good things. You guys are going to go home depressed tonight. That's not the intent here. Hopefully you'll leave with some inspiration. That's what my intent is. Well, I'll get to the good part in just a minute. But what we've done here is looked at adverse childhood experiences leading to, and there's no scientific gap. When you go through these bad experiences, it makes changes in your brain. And we're going to look at those. A couple of other interesting things. When you have one adverse childhood experience, you have a 50% greater likelihood of having more than one, which to me says trauma begets trauma, which if you think generationally as well, trauma begets trauma. If you've had 3 or more marriages and you've got kids from those marriages, there's another trauma that you've thrown on them. You have social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, adoption of health risk behaviors. So that's where the guy says there's a scientific gap, but these scientific gaps are closing, because when you ask about why people started doing drugs, or why people started overeating, or why people started smoking, why people started drinking, why people started gambling, it's typically an escape for those that get into a very addictive type of situation. I treat a woman that's about 400 pounds, or have treated in the past. I haven't seen her in a long time, but she presented and said that, I asked her, when's the last time you felt good? Tell me about a time when you've really felt good about everything. And she had multiple traumas in her background. And she said it was today. I said, oh yeah, what happened today? She said, well, I was really stressed out and overwhelmed, and I had 3 bags of M&Ms. Everything was better. And so think about that. Think about what we learned 2 weeks ago. When she got all those M&Ms, what was released in her brain chemically? Dopamine. That got that release. All that stress, all that stuff did go away. It's better. So all of those things, when we go back to all of these traumas that are causing all of these stressors, people have to find a way to get out of that. People have to find a way to get this. What happens is there's a chemical called cortisol. It gets dumped in your body and it activates you. And it's part of the fight or flight thing that's left over from when we used to fight physically to survive. Now we use our minds. Now our cortisol hurts us, especially in our sedentary lifestyle where we sit at a computer all day or at a student's desk all day looking at teachers. We have to be able to burn off that cortisol, which is probably why I'm up here standing. We have to get rid of that, because if we don't, it overwhelms us. And so folks that go into and go through all these adverse childhood experiences, well, that IV drug use takes care of that cortisol, takes care of that bad feeling, takes care of that all anxiety. Smoking sure takes that away. Alcoholism sure takes that away in the short run. But they become long-term because then people aren't able to control them. You know, if I have sex with somebody that I don't know, that sure took that all away for a little while. Now the next day I may feel horrible, but for that moment, I didn't think about all that stuff. This leads to disease, disability, and social problems, and early death. This is the stat of the night. Folks that have 6 or more adverse childhood experiences can expect to live, on average, 20 years shorter than people with none. That's an injustice to me, because of things that happen in childhood where children are not independent. Children are not able to make decisions to impact what's happening to them. They're not truly self-reliant. They're not completely responsible. In fact, many times they can't be held responsible for the things that happen to them. And yet they do feel responsible, and they carry this with them. And that one of the biggest things working through trauma is working through guilt. And so that's an injustice. If you would, what happened when children were growing up? There were neural pathways created, some destroyed. Let's take about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to switch gears, show you some videos. The class will move pretty quickly from here on.